My background before I get started. I graduated from Duquesne University in 1978 with a degree in accounting. Can everybody hear me, by the way? With a degree in accounting. From 78 through 82, I worked for an accounting firm here in Pittsburgh, got my CPA license. And then in 1982, those of you that know my wife, Kim, her and I were dating and then got engaged, and I figured she was in New York at the time, and I wasn't going to be too successful in getting Broadway to move to Pittsburgh, so I moved to New York. So from 82 through 88, I worked as an internal auditor for New York Life, and then I always wanted to get into the investment business and work in Wall Street. So after that, from 85 through 88, I worked for Merrill Lynch. I had worked at Merrill Lynch still pretty young at the time and pretty new, October 19th of 1987, which is what they call Black Monday. Does anybody in here kind of remember that day? Yeah, it was kind of being young and new to the business. It was kind of frightening, and we've had periods like 2008, 2009, where the market, the stock market dropped over that time frame roughly 30%. You've had the tech bubble with a 9/11 in 2000, 2002, and you had about a 25% drop in the stock market during that time. But on one day, October 19th, 1987, on one day, the market dropped 24%. And at that point in time, it was really the first time something like that had happened since the 20s, and people were predicting another depression at that point. At the time, we had moved out to New Jersey, so I was taking a bus to catch a train, to get a subway, and still walk about a half a mile to get to the office in Manhattan. And that's when I said, we should just move back to Pittsburgh. So we did, and then for the last 30 years, I've been pretty much self-employed. I got my CFP when I was with Merrill Lynch, Certified Financial Planner, and I was pretty much self-employed really for the last 30 years doing tax accounting and investment work. So that's a little bit about my background. Sorry, I got to lean forward here. So what I want to talk today about is grow in retirement. And I think the key word here is not just retirement, but it's also grow. This is the fourth and final segment that the financial seminar series we've been putting on, and up till now, you've had Dennis talked about investments, John has talked about taxes, Curtis has talked about budgeting, and I think when you talk about those subjects, everybody pretty much has the same objective. When you're talking about taxes, everybody, I think, pretty much wants to minimize their tax liability. When they talk about investment, they all want to see their investments grow within a certain degree of risk that you're willing to assume. And then with budgeting, as Curtis was saying last week, you're trying to kind of make ends meet, fit whatever your priorities are into that budget. But I looked at this one a little bit differently. I think retirement, you have to look at it as a stage of life. It's not just financial planning, but it's planning for where you are and where you plan on being at that point in life. I don't know why, but I always kind of break things down for me in thirds. I don't know why I have that rule, but if I'm doing a project around the house or doing work, I try to break things down into smaller tasks of a third to get to the end. If I'm planning, financial planning, maybe my spending, I'll take a third for taxes, a third for spending, a third for investing, and so forth. But I just have that rule, and I almost looked at this the same way. As you go through life, you spend about the first third, you're learning, you're growing up, you're having fun. You spend maybe the next third, you're earning and starting to plan for retirement. And the last third, really, you're starting to retire and enjoy. You retire and try to enjoy, what you've worked for that whole time. So, like I said, I kind of look at this not just financially, but as a stage of life. I remember about a year ago, I had a good friend of mine who was retired, and he certainly was well off financially. And I asked him, I said, how's retirement going? And he just looked at me and said, I don't like it. I just don't know who I am right now. And that's kind of the point I'm trying to make, is I don't think you can turn the switch and just say, I'm going to retire. You have to think about what it is you're going to do. I'm sure we all know, you're read of people that retire, they've worked lifetime at their job, and then within 6-7 months they start to deteriorate both mentally and physically. So I just want to challenge everybody just not to think of that in terms of whether you're financially capable of retiring, but also look at the other aspects of it. If you look at the start of my outline here, it says don't simply retire from something, have something to retire to. So here's the question. When is the best time for you to start thinking about your retirement? This is a joke, actually. You know the answer? I love this one. Well, the best time for you to start thinking about your retirement is before your boss starts thinking about your retirement. I'd like that. I think that's funny. So anyhow, what I want to talk about initially is kind of defining your retirement. As I stated just now, I believe you need to look at retirement as a stage of life, and like all stages of life, we strive to be happy, comfortable, and content. While being financially secure certainly is a major component, I think you have to look at other factors that come into play: your health, your outside interests, your hobbies, and other family circumstances. And that's what I mean by defining your retirement. We had started these seminars here and putting outlines together back in July, and I had all this kind of scripted and outlined out, and it was interesting. About 3 weeks ago, I was reading an article from the Pennsylvania CPA Journal, and I'm willing to bet nobody else in here reads that magazine. I don't think so. And there was an article that was almost right on point and verbatim to what I was trying to say here. And it says, CPA retirement is a blank canvas. Personalize your opportunities. So what they're saying really is that, make your retirement what it is you want to be. And they talk about some bullet points here. What will your retirement look like? What lessons have been learned? Maintaining relationships with friends, former colleagues, clients. Prioritize family and friends. How are you feeling? What is your health going to be? And probably the last thing, which I think is most important, it says make your retirement reflect your priorities. And I thought that was pretty good. So if you look at some of the things that I jotted down, some points, I pose some questions. What will your retirement look like? When will you retire? Where will you live? What will your retirement look like? Again, just some things that I jotted down. Don't let boredom define it. The first question I ask people when I'm talking to clients about retirement is I say, what are you going to do in retirement? And almost all of them have the same answer. Well, I got a lot of projects I have to do around the house, or we're going to travel a little bit. And, I think that's the answer to the question of what are you going to do when you retire? But my question is, what are you going to do during retirement? And hopefully you have 10, 20, 30, 40 plus years to do that. So, I would challenge you that you want to challenge your mind and your body to make sure during that time you are growing in retirement. And I think that's going to be the most important thing, along with the financial part of it, to planning for happy and successful retirement. Question then, when will you retire? For many people, they retire simply because they want to stop working, but does that mean you want to stop working at your present job? Are you going to work at another job? You have to ask yourself if the timing is right. When you retire is going to be a big determinant of how much you're going to need when you retire, for retirement. And the biggest fear during retirement is also what the real biggest danger is, and that's running out of money. So the sooner someone retires, the sooner they're going, or the more money they're going to need to accumulate for retirement. Where will you live? Does it make sense to sell, to downsize? Just a couple other thoughts here. What is the cost of living where you live? Florida would be different than New York or Pittsburgh or other parts of the country. Do you want a second home? I know for many of us, myself included, these winters get to be pretty hard anymore. Spending time in Florida, or the South somewhere where you winter is something to consider. Ask yourself, do you want to be where your children are? Do they want you near them? Maybe they don't. So the cost of maintaining a household and where you're going to be living during retirement needs to come into play. I'm not going to talk about other aspects of it, like personal living or nursing home, senior care, or so forth, because that's a whole different subject. But these are just some of the questions I throw out there. Now, about 3 weeks ago, and it was maybe about a month ago, I was reading the Wall Street Journal, and I ran across this article, and it was something I had not considered. It was something I had not considered when I was putting this outline together, but it does talk on point to the aspect of where you're going to live. And there was an over 55 community in Northern California. Well, the title of the article was "Wealth Gap Among Retirees Disrupts Old Age." And there was a retirement community, over 55 community in Northern California, and there was a pretty bitter battle that took place between two factions there. And it was about all things, it was a pickleball court. They were fighting over the cost of a pickleball court. It was going to be about $300,000, and there were a group of people who were opposed to it because everybody was going to get assessed for that cost, and there was a group of people that were for it. And I thought about this, and there are certain things that are going to be beyond your control. But you better consider that again when I'm talking about where you retire. One of the things that struck me in this that was, I thought, pretty disgusting was the president of the association here, I'll read this to you, stepped out on his front porch and found a brown paper bag, and inside was the chopped off head of a rat that said, "You're next." And I just found that to be so disgusting. You know, having something to retire to, you know, instead of the battle and the bitterness, maybe strive for happiness and helping. I just, you know, found that to be pretty disgusting. So you know, talk about here, I'll read to you 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 17 to 19. Tell those who are rich not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which will soon be gone, but their pride and trust should be in the living God, who always richly gives us all we need for retirement. Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and should give happily to those in need, always being ready to share with others whatever God has given them. By doing this, they will be storing up real treasure for themselves in heaven. It is the only safe investment for eternity. So that's kind of what I want to talk about as far as, you know, painting your canvas, if you will. Next question then is, how do you get there? So we'll talk about some techniques and strategies that I use, at least in talking to clients and helping them to plan financially for retirement. I think the first thing you need to do is look at whatever stage of life you're in. You know, you may be in retirement already, you may have 10 to 20 years to retire, or you may have a longer term time frame than that. And obviously that's going to determine what strategies you employ to get there. First question I ask, you know, in following the outline here is how much will you need? Well, as far as income goes, I know there's always been a conventional thinking that in retirement you're going to need 70 to 80% of your current income. And I'm not necessarily a subscriber to that philosophy. I think that's just too general in thinking. It doesn't really address anybody's personal needs. The first rule of thumb for me is to focus on spending, not income. You know, once you have an idea of how much you're going to spend in retirement, then you can, I think, start to calculate what you're going to need when you can retire, and it will answer a lot of questions. You got to think about a lot of factors in doing that. How many years, like I said, until retirement, what rate of return you're going to get on your investments, what effect will inflation have, you know, do you plan on spending your money, do you want to leave an inheritance for your children, and what other sources of income you have. And then obviously the final question is life expectancy, mortality, how long you will live. I always like to plan and tell people to plan for not planning on using their principal when they retire. It gives them a little bit of a safety net in case markets go bad or in case there's some unknown expenses or unplanned for expenses. If you go to the internet, you'll find a lot, and Google retirement plan calculators, you'll find numerous calculators for determining how much you will need to retire. I found one from Fidelity, a big mutual fund company, and they say a good rule of thumb is to have 10 times your final salary in savings if you want to retire by age 67. You know, they also have a timeline in there. You know, by age 30, have the equivalent of your salary saved for retirement. By age 40, have 3 times your salary saved. By age 50, have 6 times your salary saved. By 60, 8 times. And then by 67, have 10 times your salary saved. It's a rule of thumb. I don't particularly like a model like that. Again, like I said, I like to focus on spending. And one that I've always used that I thought is practical was that you can safely withdraw 4% of your money, and that would last a lifetime, kind of what they call the 4% rule. I think there's a lot of different ways you can go about that, but planning for retirement is kind of like a diet to a degree. You know, there's a lot that work. The ones that work, though, are the ones that you stick to. So once you set up a plan and a process, you know, again, you have to stick to it, I believe. I have a couple handouts here that I think are helpful that I want to walk through, and it kind of is illustrating a process I go through in talking to clients and how you might want to go about at least planning for it. So if you'd like, go to handout or Exhibit 1. And in financially planning for retirement, you have to make a lot of assumptions, and I can tell you none of them are going to come true. But you have to start somewhere, and at least it'll get you in the ballpark for you know, what you're trying to do. So look at this page here, and I'll tell you what I was trying to accomplish here and try to get across. What are the assumptions? Well, I'm going to spend $75,000. That's going to be my annual need for spending at retirement. I have to think about inflation. I'm going to use a 3.75% inflation factor. Historically, the consumer price index has averaged about 3.76% since World War II. We've been in a long period of low inflation right now, but that might be changing. So you have to consider what effect that's going to have on what you're going to need for spending. I used a 4% withdrawal rate, like I said before, so you'd be withdrawing 4% of your earnings from your investment. I assumed a 7% rate of return on your investment, which is a little bit aggressive in today's market, and it's going to come with risk, so you got to consider that. And then I also assumed that you're of Social Security age, and you'd be getting roughly, maybe 2 recipients, getting $36,000 a year. So the point is, you put together these assumptions about your own situation, and how do you model this out to apply to yourself? And let's go through the columns here. They're probably not too evident, at least right on the surface, what I'm trying to accomplish. But I have years 1 through 40. So that would be how many years it is until you plan on retiring. Now, if you look at the spending column, that starts at $75,000. But if you're going to, if inflation is going to be 3.75% every year, then what you're going to need is going to increase every year as you go from year 1 to 40. Just take year 20, for example. That's $75,000 that you're spending now, or you plan on spending now. At a 3.75% inflation rate, that's going to be the equivalent of $156,000. So you can see how that can be devastating, if you will, if you don't plan on costs going up over the years. Same thing with Social Security. I started at $36,000. If that increased every year, if you look at that column, again, go to year 20, and you'll see $75,173. So what I'm trying to say here is if you're going to need 20 years from now, $156,000, 75 comes from Social Security. That means the remainder, $81,000, needs to come from investments that you have or retirement plans that you've set up. If you withdraw 4% on that, the next column, that's roughly $2 million. So what I'm saying is 20 years from now, to generate $80,000 of income that's going to be needed, you'll need roughly a $2 million portfolio at 4%. If you had money sitting around right now, you could invest, the next column is net present value. What that means is if you had $526,000 right now in year 20, and you invested that at 7%, you would have the $2 million 20 years from now, so you would kind of met your goal. Not too many people have $500,000 sitting around right now, so I broke it down even further into monthly. If you were to save monthly for the next 20 years, how much would you need to put aside to get to that goal based on the assumptions we said? And that's about $3,900. So you can kind of look at this chart here and go through different years and different scenarios and really build it to whatever you feel your situation is going to require. Is there any questions on that? It's kind of technical and detailed. I don't know if anybody wanted to. Now go to the next exhibit, Exhibit 2. And now what I did the same scenario, but what I assumed on that one is that you were not going to, that you were basically going to deplete your principal, so that at some point in time, the amount that you had saved up for retirement would be zero. So obviously you don't need as much at that point in time. So I have the same assumptions as before. However, I added two additional ones. One is a rate of return during retirement, which is 4%. And I think you want to be a little bit more conservative as you get older and put your money away for retirement. And then the other assumption I made here, and this is the big variable, and that's life expectancy. Well, let's assume you retire at age 65. I put in 35 years, so that would mean basically that you would pass away at age 100, in which case you would have used all your retirement savings. My first 3 columns are the same as before because your spending doesn't change, inflation doesn't change, and your Social Security doesn't change. But if you go to age 20, again, go to year 20, and look at the net present value table. If you're not going to be saving the money and you're going to be spending down, you would only need about $1,520,000 of investments at that point in time versus the $2 million from the previous illustration, and you only need to save about $2,918 a month, your monthly savings, versus the $3,900 a month there. So my point in all this is it's a kind of a process or a methodology that I think that you have to apply to your own situation, whatever you feel you're going to be needing for retirement. And I go through something like this with clients just because it kind of gets the ball rolling, but like I said, assumptions are never going to come true, but they'll kind of get you to where you'll have a comfort level about what you're planning for. So that kind of goes through the, a process I go through for is how much, and calculating how much a person's going to need. The next question then is how to invest it. I'm a believer in doing it with retirement accounts. After you determine how much you need, I think the next step would be to determine the most efficient way to implement this. The simplest starting point is to invest in your employer's 401k, which is a tax-advantaged retirement savings account, or another type of retirement vehicle, such as a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA. These accounts offer numerous tax advantages, including tax deduction or exclusion of income, deferral of taxation on investment returns and contributions, and they have distributions which are not subject to Social Security, and in many cases they're not subject to state and local tax. Pennsylvania happens to be one of those states where retirement income is not taxed at either the state or the local level. In today's world, years ago, you used to have defined contribution plans where your employer would set up a plan where you would have a guaranteed or a fixed income for life, but you don't see those two more unless you're in a union. But right now, a lot of the employers have shifted, really for about the last 30 years, have shifted the burden of retirement onto the employees, and that's why you have the popularity of plans such as 401k plans. I've put together here in Exhibit 3 kind of a chart of different types of retirement plans. I have highlighted their 401k because that's the most popular. Just going over some of the features of a 401k plan. In 2018, you can defer up to $18,500 of your own salary in a 401k, and another $6,000, what they call the catch-up provision, if you're over age 50, for a total of $24,500. In most cases, I know the majority of the clients, actually probably all of the clients I deal with, they have a match too. So the employer will put in a certain amount of money based upon whether you put in money into your 401k. And in a lot of cases, they have options where you could do traditional versus Roth. And here's what I mean by that. I'm a big believer in Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks, especially for younger people, because all your money down the road when you pull it out is tax-free. So with a traditional 401k, for the sake of math, let's say your salary is $78,000 a year and you could put $18,000 a year into it. Well, you're taxed on $60,000. So that $18,000 that you put into a traditional 401k is before tax, so you don't pay tax on that. However, all your earnings and all the money you pull out when you get to retirement age becomes taxable. Now, with a Roth 401k, the opposite is true. If your salary is, let's say, 78, you put in 18, you have a net of 16. But you're taxed on $78,000, so you're paying tax on money you're setting aside now. However, all that growth, all the earnings, and all those contributions, when you pull the money out down the road, is tax-free. And I could tell you, right now, a couple of things. Number one is if you're paying a little bit of tax every year, I think most people can absorb that, but to have the ability to have a large sum of money down the road that's tax-free that you can withdraw on, I think will be a big benefit to everyone when they get to retirement age. The other thing that's working in your favor right now is that tax rates have been lowered for this year and at least the foreseeable future. So the tax savings you get on traditional or pre-tax just isn't as great as it used to be. So I'm a strong believer in, number one, if you have a Roth 401k option, utilizing that. And then number two, if your employer offers you a match, I think you definitely have to at least contribute, regardless of whether you can or can't actually, you have discretionary income, at least an amount of money up to that match. So for instance, a popular employer provision is that they will match the first 100% of the first 3 or 4% you put in. So if you put in 3% of your salary, your employer is going to put in 3% of your salary. In essence, you've gotten 100% return on your money, and there's nowhere else that you can get that. So I think at very worst, you at least want to put in up to the employer match in a 401k. If your employer doesn't offer you a 401k, you always have the option of putting money into an individual retirement account. And again, you have the same type of oh wait, let's do something. I skipped the handout. Let's go to Exhibit 4 here. So I took the same assumptions I was making before, and I I added a couple more columns. And basically, the last three columns talk about if your salary was $75,000 and you were to defer 10%. Let's say you put 10% into a 401k and your employer matched 4%. You could see what the monthly cost of that would be. The monthly cost of that to you would be. So that would be the salary deferral column. And I did not adjust these for inflation, but they would. So presumably, as your salary is going up, you could have the opportunity to contribute more. So you would be putting in $625 a month. Your employer would be matching $250. Now, just that pot of money or pool of money, what is that going to be worth in the future, in year 1, 2, 3, and 4? If you go down the line, that's the portfolio future value. So again, let's focus on year 20. I was saying before, if you would need $2 million under the assumptions I gave, you would have roughly a fourth of that just in I think a very affordable monthly contribution into a 401k. Interestingly enough, if you go to the year 40, let's say you're younger and in your 20s, you could look at that number, and the power of compounding really grows dramatically. Just keeping that, I think, very affordable monthly contribution into a 401k, you would be about halfway to your goal. The very last column and row would be about $2.2 million. So one of the keys to anything with retirement planning is to start early, because the power of compounding of the money is pretty dramatic. Yeah, so I wanted to go over that. And then individual retirement accounts, if your employer does not offer one, you have the opportunity to put into an IRA. And again, you have the same type of options. It could be a traditional or a Roth IRA. If you go to the handout Exhibit 5, this will explain some of the differences between the two. Couple of things. Your ability to put money into a Roth IRA is going to be limited by your income. On page 1 there for 2018, if you're a single filer and you make more than $120,000, you cannot contribute to a Roth IRA. If you're married filing joint making more than $189,000, you cannot contribute to a Roth IRA. If you're not covered by an employer plan, you can still contribute to a traditional IRA, regardless of how much you make. And even if you're above certain income limits, you can still contribute to a traditional IRA, but the contributions become non-tax deductible. So if you go to the second page of that handout, this will tell you where it says deductible contributions for 2018. If you're covered by an employer plan and you're a single taxpayer making more than $63,000, you can still deduct that contribution into the IRA. If you get above that, it gets phased out. For a joint married filing joint, if you're covered by an employer-sponsored 401k plan and you make more than $101,000, then you cannot contribute a tax-deductible contribution to a 401k. But there's a pretty kind of neat strategy here that a lot of people use, and I'm not quite sure why the IRS makes you do this, because it's kind of two steps to get to one. If you want to put money into a Roth 401k and your income phases you out of that ability, you could put money into a traditional IRA. It becomes non-tax deductible, and then the very next day you can convert it to a Roth. So you still have a Roth contribution, but because the way the rules are written, there's no income phase out for conversion, there's only income phase out for contribution. So you can contribute, non-deductible, and convert. And a lot of people do that. I don't know why they make you take two steps to get to one, but it's the way it works. But it does work. And I have another handout here. So I'm kind of again building up a process here on something I think you can go through, a means that you can go through to get to retirement planning. Go to Exhibit 6. So let's say then you put money into your 401k, you still have discretionary income, and you want to put money into a Roth. I just explained to you a way that you can go about doing that. And again, I am a big believer in those, because I think as you get older and into retirement age, having a pool of money that is tax-free that you can pull from really eliminates one of the costs from your budget, and that cost is taxes. So I just, for the sake of example here, said, what if you put in $2,000 into a Roth every year, and maybe you invested it a little bit more aggressively? If you got a rate of return of anywhere from 9, 10, 11, or 12%, what would that money look like down the road? In year 20, let's go again to year 20, If you put in $2,000 a year, that would be a total contribution of $40,000. If you go over to the 12% column, that 12% return for 20 years is worth $161,000. So that's basically $120,000 of tax-free income for a contribution of $2,000 a year. But what is really, I think, compelling about this is if you go down to year 40, and again, this exemplifies the point of starting early. If you go down to year 40, and you were lucky enough to invest and be pretty successful when you're investing and get 12% rate of return, 40 years at $2,000, that's $80,000. However, that $80,000 would be worth $1.7 million, completely tax-free. So I just offer this as another supplement to maybe thinking about for financial planning for retirement in addition to a 401k. Here's one thing, too, that I think might be the best strategy I could give you in terms of Roth 401k and investing. And it may not apply to everybody in this room, but it certainly would apply to maybe your children or grandchildren. And I actually did this for my kids. If you started off at, let's say, age 18 and put $3,000 a year into a Roth IRA, so let's say they're 18, 19, 20, 21. You've got 4 years, they're 21 years old. You put $12,000 contribution in. By the time they're age 66, which is roughly full retirement age, that's 45 years. If you were lucky enough to get 12% rate of return, anybody have an idea of what that 12,000 grows to? Can somebody throw out a number? I just want to see how close you are. $1.673 million. And the power of that is getting 12% rate of return, and it's over 45 years. So there's a couple lessons there, I think. Number one is it shows you to start investing early, and I think it also gets your children and or grandchildren to start thinking about, saving money for down the road. One of the caveats here is that in order to contribute to a Roth or an IRA, be it Roth or traditional, is that you have to have earned income. You have to have a salary or wages. And maybe not every child or grandchild has that. But there's also a way that you can help that in that they have household employment. So there's nothing to prevent you from paying your son or daughter to clean the house, cut the grass or whatever, and giving them earned income. There's some rules and regulations and some restrictions on that, but there's an easy way to go about doing that. But I think just in terms of not necessarily planning retirement for yourself, but someone else, I think that's a great strategy. Again, it's small dollars, but the power of compounding shows you how much that grows tax-free. So I talked then about how much you're going to need, what type of accounts you want to use. One other thing too is if you're self-employed or if you have side income, some people work side jobs. In that handout there, you can still set up a retirement plan for yourself. So even though you're covered by an employer plan, a 401k, even though you may have an IRA, you can also set up another plan for yourself. And that chart that I had listed different kind of plans, and you could look at something like that. So maybe if it's extra discretionary income, that gives you the opportunity to start putting money even more into retirement. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about then is how to invest. So we talked about how much you're going to need, what type of accounts you want to use, and how you invest, I think, really depends on what stage of life you're in and how long you have to go to before you're going to need the money. I'm a big believer in asset allocation, and I'm also a big believer in making sure your time frame is right. You don't want to be invested completely in the stock market if you only have a year before you need the money because there's too much risk. I just threw in the outline here an asset allocation method. So if you have a long term to go in the before you retire, I think you can probably have 80 to 85% of your monies in equities or stocks. And you want to shorten that as you get closer to retirement because I don't think it's prudent to take the risk. So when you talk about cash or money market investments, I'm basically talking about investments that have a guarantee to them or they have safety of principal, something like CDs, treasury bills, government bonds, fixed annuities. And right now, in today's environment, you're probably only expecting anywhere from 1 to 3.5% return on those. When you get into income type of investments, you might be talking about corporate bonds or longer term government bonds. You're probably in the 4 to 6% range on that. And then when you get into stocks, you can expect to make 10+%. You can also expect to lose money on that. So, like I said, I'm a big believer in asset allocation. I think a lot of studies will show that how you allocate your assets amongst cash, fixed income, and equities, stocks, are more important than the individual securities that you choose. So I just threw this out here as maybe some guidelines, where you are on the timeline on how you may want to allocate your assets from current to short term to long term. If you go to Exhibit 7, this is what I was talking about now. That shows you some of the asset classes. Cash, the safer investments, probably 1 to 3.5% return. That would be money market, treasury bills, certificates of deposits. Bonds, probably in the 4 to 6% range now. Government, corporate, municipals, high yield bonds. And then the more risky category would be the stocks. Go to the next handout, which is Exhibit 8, and this will illustrate a couple of thoughts, or a couple of points that I was making. This shows you a chart of how $1 would grow or change from 1926 to 2010. So it's an 80-year time frame. So if you look at it, there's several different graphs here. Inflation, they're 3%. Treasury bills and government treasury bills, which would be the cash type of investments I'm talking about, have averaged about a 3.6% rate of return for that 80-year time frame. Government bonds have averaged about a 5.5% rate of return over that 80-year period. And large stocks and small stocks have been anywhere from 10 to 12%. So if you look at it, you can see the stock line gives you the greatest rate of return. $1 invested in 1926 would now be worth, when I say now, 2010, be worth $16,000. If you look at the inflation number, $1 in 1926 in 2010 is now $12. So over that 80-year period, that $1 that you needed back then is the equivalent of $12 now. It increased 12 times. So if you remember back at one of my illustrations, when I was showing the effect of inflation, I went from $75,000 a year to $156,000 a year in 20 years. So that basically doubled. 180 years here, it went up 12 times. So consider that, because the effects of inflation are real. The other point, too, is if you look at that top one, small stocks, that's a 12.1% rate of return over an 80-year period. Go back to the other illustration I had with the Roth IRA when I had the 12% column. So maybe you take a Roth IRA and you take those assets and you invest them a little bit more aggressively, but for the longer term. The possibility of getting 12% is not out of line, even though it seems like a high rate of return. So I just offer these as some handouts and some things to think about as far as planning the financial aspect part of it. Okay. Just a couple other miscellaneous things. I just want to throw out some. Number one, you can follow the outline here under miscellaneous. Up your investment consistently. Get in the habit of changing your contribution to your 401k or IRA. Whenever you get a raise, you could take a percentage of that and grow that over time. If you work for a company and you have employer stock in a qualified plan, there's a very significant tax savings you can get there, that if you take that stock and roll it out and distribute it, you can pay capital gains versus ordinary income on that. So there's a significant tax savings opportunity if you happen to be in that situation. Rollovers and transfers, if you're moving money out of a company plan into your own or transferring money from one IRA to another, you have 60 days to move it from one to the other. And if you don't do that, you're going to get hit with taxes. And if you're under age 59 and a half, you're also going to get hit with a 10% penalty. So you need to consider that 60-day rule in rolling over or transferring money from one plan to another. There are exceptions to that. I have on Exhibit 9 here. If you ever do get into that situation, there's a letter that you can send to the IRS which would offer various reasons for them at least abating the penalty on a distribution where you don't meet this, or a transfer where you don't meet the 60-day rollover rule. And they're pretty good. From my experience, they're pretty good about abating the penalty. The tax they won't, but they won't abate the penalty. I highlighted one here because I thought it was kind of interesting. I was late on my 60-day rollover because I was incarcerated. Hopefully you're not in that situation. And here's the final thing I put on. I'm not going to go into the IRA losses and annuitizing just for the sake of time here. But the final thing is, and I'm a big believer in this, is to get out of debt as soon as you can. As you get into the retirement years, I'm just not a big believer in debt. There are people that'll tell you, if I can take out a home equity loan at 3% and earn 5%, I'm better off doing it. And if you run the numbers, you are. But it's with risk, and I just think that you want to scale back on debt and risk as you get older, and that's probably more of a personal opinion, but I'm a pretty hardcore believer in that. So let's talk about Social Security, because that really is the cornerstone, I think, for a lot of retirement plans. And in looking at Social Security, there are numerous strategies to consider on when you begin to start collecting Social Security. That the time to claim and receive benefits depends on age, gender, health, tax rates, rate of return, and whether you plan on continuing to work and receive earned income. I'll read to you a couple rules right now on that, and then I want to go into the handouts because I think they tell a pretty good story. If you are not at full retirement age, you can earn up to $17,040 a year and not have your Social Security benefit impacted. If you earn more than that, you will lose $1 for every $2 paid. So basically, you're paying back 50 cents on a dollar if you're not at full retirement age. And this is on top of already receiving a reduced benefit. So if you plan on continuing to work and make above $17,000 a year, I don't think it makes any sense to start collecting Social Security early, because you're taking a reduced benefit and you're paying tax on it, and you're given a portion of it back. In the year that you reach full retirement age, you can earn up to $45,360 a year, and if you're in excess of that, you will pay back $1 for every $3 paid. And after full retirement age, there is no earnings limit. I'm not a big believer in paying that back either. So I think if you can wait longer to collect Social Security, you want to wait until you get to full retirement age or beyond. If you wait to collect beyond full retirement age, you'll get an 8% increase every year until you reach age 70. So age 70 is the year that you'd want to start taking it out if you can wait that long. And I think that if you can wait till age 70, other factors to consider, health, life expectancy mainly, rate of return, that you should wait till age 70, just because from full retirement age until then, you're getting an 8% return on your money, and there's nowhere right now that you can get a risk-free, government-guaranteed 8% rate of return. Of course, that depends on whether you can afford to wait that long or not. But I just think that's something to really consider. Just as a sidebar too, I wrote down a comment. There's a good website, www.ssa.gov, the Social Security website. It's a good idea, I think, to go there every year. They show you your earnings record. They give you estimates. You can do what-if scenarios on what amount of Social Security you're going to be receiving. And it's a good idea also to check your wages just to make sure that they're crediting your account correctly. That's not so much a big problem now with everything being as electronic, but I know years ago that was an issue when they had to manually input W-2s that they may have had a wrong Social Security number, a wrong dollar amount, and you weren't getting credited for all your Social Security earnings. So it's a good idea to check that. Let's go to a couple handouts on that, and I think this illustrates some pretty good points on Social Security. So Exhibit 10 here kind of goes what I was talking about as far as when do you want to, making the decision on when you want to collect. So look at the first column, year of birth. And I'll just take, if we want to focus on 1 year, I'll just take the year I was born, 1956. So I hit age 62 this year, 2018. My full retirement age is based upon your year of birth. So you can see in this chart, if you look at that full retirement age column, it's anywhere from 65 to 67. For me, that would be my full retirement age would be 66 and 4 months. And what that means is I could collect at that point in time and not take a reduced benefit. So if you scroll over then to age 62 benefit, the third to the last column, just look over there. If I started taking Social Security benefits at age 62, I would only be getting 73 1/3% of my full benefit. So if my Social Security benefit was $1,000, I'm only getting a monthly check starting at age 62 of $730. If I wait till age 65, I would get $1,000. If you wait till age 70, go to the very last column, instead of getting a $1,000 check every month, you're getting $1,290. So you can see the longer you wait, if you can afford to do that, your benefit goes up. But the big variable in this becomes two things. Number one, it becomes, if you start taking your check early, can you invest that and still have more money down the road? And number two, the big wild card for everybody, which is life expectancy. You know, if you started taking early and you don't live to age 70, obviously you were better off taking early, but if you waited to age 70 and don't live that long, then you made the wrong decision. I have a couple charts in here that I think you can use as guidelines for hoping to make that decision. So if you look at the next two pages of the handout. Okay, this assumes a 3% rate of return for a male. And here's how this works. You have three columns there. If you claim at age 62, if you claim at age 66, and if you claim at age 70. So those are the columns, and if you look at the rows, the first one is age 66. So if you claimed Social Security at age 62, by the time you hit age 66, if you invested that money at 3%, what they call the net present value would be $63,487. So if you go down to age 70, the next line down, that same column, age 62, is $129,000, and the 66 column is $86,000. So basically what that's saying, if you lived to age 70, you would have been better off claiming your Social Security at age 62. However, if you live to age 78.8 years, that's about your break-even point. At age 78 years and 8 months, your claim at age 62 would be worth about $279,000, and that's roughly the same number at age 66. So the decision on whether to claim early or wait, again, it's a life expectancy decision, but that kind of tells you what your break-even point is, 78.8. Now, go down a couple more rows, and you can see at age 80.7, if you started collecting at age 62, that money would have been worth roughly $313,000. At age 66, $324,000. At age 70, $324,000. So that's about your break-even point on the decision on whether you collect it at full retirement age 66 or age 70. And then everything beyond that, living beyond age 80 and 7 months, your decision point is that it would have been better off waiting to age 70 to collect. And again, I throw out a personal opinion that the longer you can wait, the better, because I think as you get older, the need to have that extra income becomes greater because, you know, you can't work as much, maybe health insurance costs change. But I think these are good charts to use in trying to get some decision-making factors for when to collect Social Security. The next couple pages basically illustrate the same thing, but the only variable that has changed is the assumed rate of return. One uses 5% and one uses 7%. I tend to be pretty conservative. I would use the 3 just because I think it's a more conservative approach. The other one on exhibit, what is that, 8, I guess? This is kind of interesting. So it goes through the same analysis, but it uses female versus male just because life expectancy of a female is greater than a man. And it goes through the same process. So if you look at single females, point number 6, for a woman claiming at age 62, life expectancy is 21.8 years, age 83 in 10 months. For a woman claiming at age 66, life expectancy is 18.72 years, age 84 and 9 months. For a woman claiming at age 70, life expectancy is 15.72 years, 85 years and 9 months. First looking at that, that's kind of counterintuitive. It's like the older you are, the longer you're going to live. And I think when they do these mortality studies, it's because as you get older, it tends to be a population of people that are healthier, maybe have a healthier lifestyle. Anybody that had a terminal disease or something may not be in the statistics anymore. So I thought that was kind of interesting to look at that. But if you look at, again, going through the same analysis, a break-even point is about 80 years. 80 years and 10 months from claiming from age 62 to age 66. About a little bit before that, actually, 318,000 at age 62 and 330,000 at age 66. So this is the kind of thing, again, since Social Security becomes such a big part, and hopefully it will be for all of us, don't know what's going to happen there, but I think it's going to be around for longer than some of the pundits are projecting. I think these are good exercises to go through for determining when you plan on collecting. Anybody have any questions on that? I know I covered a lot here, and some of it's kind of technical, digging deep into the numbers, and talking a little bit fast too to try to get everything within the time frame. Any questions on that? Okay, then just a couple other points to talk about in closing, and they're not necessarily retirement in nature, but they're more estate planning in nature, and I think they fall into the thought process in retirement. And I think these rules or these practices apply to everybody, regardless of what age you're in. And I think you want to have certain documents in place. I mean, I think everybody needs to have a will. A will is going to direct where your assets go when you pass away. If you don't have one, it's called dying intestate, and the state determines how your assets get distributed, and I don't think anybody wants that. I think you want to have a powers of attorney in place. You could have general powers of attorney or limited powers of attorney, and basically a general power of attorney will give another person, let's say your spouse or maybe your child, the authority to act on your behalf. If it's a durable power of attorney, they would still have the power to act on your behalf if you become incapacitated. You could have a limited power of attorney where maybe you want to give somebody the authority to act on your behalf for just a certain smaller segment of activities. Let's say you're selling a house or something like that. It must have a living will. Unlike a will, a living will takes effect while you're still alive. And the primary purpose of a living will, and it's also known as various other terms, you'll also hear it referred to as an advanced healthcare directive. It's to provide specific instructions to an agent for making decisions about your health if you become incapacitated or can no longer make those decisions. So I think it's imperative, because you never know what's going to happen, to have a living will. And then you can set up trusts too. Some people set up revocable trusts. You don't really have any tax savings for that, but you may have probate savings. I'm mixed on that, whether they're beneficial or not. They're very good if you have out-of-state property or something out of state, and then you don't have to go and probate into other states. But the need for those is not as great, I think, as some of the other documents. And then the final thing is irrevocable trusts. Some people set up irrevocable trust as an estate tax savings mechanism. And then the other thing too is I had included in the handout there is the legacy fund. Newlonsburg, we have a legacy fund. I think that is a good, a good vehicle for the church, for those of you who are, doing your estate planning and your retirement planning, to consider contribution to the legacy fund, during that process. And that was pretty much all I had. Anybody have any questions? I trying to not get too technical, but I wanted to really illustrate a couple of points, thinking about your retirement. How do you go about planning through a process that's going to involve a lot of assumptions which are going to be personal to you, not necessarily generic to everybody, and then talk about some other strategies for investing, and then also some other documents and procedures that I think you need to have in place, regardless of what stage of life you're in. Any questions? That was easy. Nobody's asking questions. Jan. Right. Okay, so here's what happens. With a revocable trust, you can change that at any time. An irrevocable trust, people use those mainly for estate tax savings. Right now, for federal tax purposes, the exclusion amounts to almost $6 million, so the need for an irrevocable trust isn't as great as it used to be, because what happens is you're taking assets, let's say a house, investments, whatever it is, out of your estate and putting them into a trust. So you name a trustee, you name beneficiaries, usually children, so, but it's irrevocable, which means you can't change it. So everything about that's out of your control. You can't direct the assets, you name a trustee, everything's technically out of your estate. And then a lot of people did that for, mainly for tax savings reasons. I don't think the need for that is great right now. You will save Pennsylvania inheritance tax, which is 4.5% for lineal descendants. You can also do that for privacy reasons, because when you put money into a trust, let's say versus a will gets probated, and then it becomes public record. Some people do that for privacy reasons because a trust still maintains privacy and anonymous. And then the other reason people put something into a trust versus leaving it pass through their will is when it passes through the will, it goes to your beneficiary at that point in time. Well, maybe your children are too young to handle money, or they're too young to manage it, or maybe you're not happy with their spouse. A variety of reasons. You can put money into a trust and designate then that they don't have access to that until a period later in life, 35 years old, 40 years old, whatever it might be. So a trust becomes, it's irrevocable. That's the point I try to stress to people. It's irrevocable in the term, insofar as once you set it up, you can't change it, and you can't take the money back. So you need to be pretty sure about what you're putting in there, but it gives you a little bit more control on how you direct things. And again, I've seen it used for people that don't want to leave. If they pass away, they don't want to leave an inheritance to their children because they may blow it. They want the spouse to get a hold of it for a variety of reasons. So you can say that you can only touch the income until age 50 or 45 or whatever you choose. Okay. Okay, nothing else? Okay.